Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Wavelengths, an Amphenol Broadband Solutions podcast. If you're tuning in to today's episode of the podcast, guess what? You're jumping into a part two. That's right. This is part two of a conversation with Thomas Pace, the CEO of NetRise. So if you missed part one, go ahead and jump back out, listen to part one, and then loop back around. But if you're here with us for a continuation of our conversation, then you know that we're going to be talking about all things connected homes and the larger privacy and security needs of connected homes, as well as the network infrastructure that supports this growing ecosystem of connected IoT devices. So make sure that you're listening to part one. If you're already caught up with part one, then welcome to part two of our conversation. And let's go ahead and jump in. We're continuing our conversation again with Mr. Thomas Pace, CEO of NetRise. If you had to offer your own advice here, how do you think these various nodes of risk, right? End users, device manufacturers, networks, etc., how should they collaborate more proactively to prevent hacks and data breaches, right? Because, I mean, a lot of responsibility often gets talked about as an individual responsibility, right? Device manufacturers need to hold themselves and their standards, to account. End users need to hold themselves and their standards for where they share their data, to whatever that certain standard is and try to not cross it, etc. But I mean, do you see any room for a little more handshaking and, not like kumbaya hand holding, but like, let's get this done hand holding to collaborate across those various nodes of risk? What do you think?
I think that there is a massive opportunity for organizations to differentiate themselves from a very advanced product security perspective. And I think organizations that choose to do that will have a market differentiable service or solution that they can provide. So, we've looked at a significant amount of telecommunications devices and the firmware of those things. And it's not great. So the reason I bring that up is the infrastructure providers. I mean, imagine and think about the buying power an AT&T or Verizon has. I mean, they can go back to anyone and say anything they want to, right? Hey, we want a device that has 0 vulnerabilities. First company to do that, you win the contract. They can do that tomorrow. There's nothing stopping them from doing that. What's stopping them, I think, is a set of probably not great incentives that has been laid bare. So that's the problem you have here in terms of unwinding it. You can write down how to do it on a piece of paper, but then you look at the practical implementation of these things. And you realize really fast that the set of incentives that are actually driving the market are not the ones you would hope would be driving the market.
To intersect the work that you're doing here a little bit more before I move topics a bit, what role do you see third-party security solutions and this idea of instead of sort of device-based security, more oversight and monitoring of device ecosystems in real time? What role do you see that playing in this security ecosystem? Break that down for us.
I see it playing a massive role, obviously. It's kind of like a who's watching the watchman role in some respects, which is always a good thing, right? I mean, just like the Department of Defense has watchdogs and other, they have the checks and balances of the 3 branches of government, right? It always makes sense to have basically another set of eyes on these things. And so what I find is to kind of harken back to the lack of visibility discussion. If they're not going to provide that visibility, fine. There are other third parties who can and will. If you go all the way back to 20 some years ago, Microsoft was the people making the operating system, but it took third parties to identify the vulnerabilities in that operating system, right? So this is not a new idea. in terms of, leveraging third parties to provide, more positive outcomes here for even very large companies. It's really what's happened forever.
We brought this up and kind of teased it out a little bit, the U.S. cyber trust mark. I don't want to ask about that just yet. I want to actually paint a broad question here, but let's talk legislation, regulation, sort of the public sector's role in all of this. What are your thoughts on current regulation and current, legislation around privacy and security standards? Would you say that they're sufficient to protect consumer privacy in connected homes? Is that even the right place to start? What are your thoughts on its role here in this ecosystem too, and kind of where it's at?
I mean, generally speaking, so you have to have some regulation is required. I think I'm not a regulatory expert, but there are certain industries where if there was zero regulation, you're talking about just a real not great state of affairs. So, however, I think regulation does a real number on competition. It generally makes the opportunity for incumbents like very positive, right? Like new players basically can't enter the space for a number of reasons. And so I don't feel like that typically yields a very positive outcome for what is actually hoping to get accomplished, right? Imagine waking up and being like, I'm going to start a bank today. Do you know how impossible that is? It's impossible. It's totally impossible. Or you're saying like, I want to start a new telecommunications carrier today. Good luck. Like, it's not even in the, like, it's out so far out of reality. And that's actually what makes a guy, in my opinion, like the things that like Elon Musk does, like so totally insane, right? He's like, oh, I'm just going to go create an American car company. Like what? Like that's the most impressive thing, is that he's created these companies in insanely regulated industries with a fair amount of success as well. So it just creates this set of circumstances where you have to spend more time navigating the regulatory situation than actually solving the problem. And that's my concern about this. Conceptually, how could I not be in favor of like what's going, you know what I mean? Like having some minimum standard, having some set of rules and objective measures that meet some legal framework, regulation, whatever. Like conceptually, you have to imagine that's a positive thing. But then I get concerned about every device manufacturer ending up in court, which is just going to stifle innovation, right? Because people are going to be like, what's the point of me starting this company if I'm just going to get sued like 6 months after I start the company because like I didn't do a perfect job on this thing. And that is exactly what will happen. I mean, America is a pretty litigious place. And there's a benefit to that, right? The benefit to that is that companies behave themselves here more than they do in other places, right? I mean, you hear the horror stories about, other nations building infrastructure for like the World Cup and Olympics, and let's just say there's no OSHA over in those countries, right? And so it's like this weird balancing act where you need some minimum standard here, but where do you draw that line? And that becomes orders of magnitude more difficult when you talk about cybersecurity, which is an abstract thing, right? It just is. Like if you're saying like, hey, we want to build, it's like when they compare it to Energy Star, I don't agree with that analogy, right? That's a very quantitative, fixed set of physics that is being applied to a thing. That same set of criteria and measurement does not exist in cybersecurity. At least it has not been agreed upon by the industry, that's for sure.
I think it talks about, again, how complex this ecosystem is, and especially when you're talking about something like cybersecurity, where the underlying technologies evolve very quickly. new solutions come into play that kind of change up the whole dynamic of managing cybersecurity, of setting standards, of cybersecurity solutions themselves now posing new risks? I mean, when you talk about like AI and machine learning being now a core foundation of a lot of these solutions, that in and of itself, again, starts to keep that wheel turning. And, I'm with you. I agree that legislation and regulation is useful and important, but it is also bureaucratic and moves at a rather snail pace. So it's not going to be a leading metric of, security standards. Likely, a more collaborative approach is going to need to take place to identify what those strategies are. Regardless, speaking of a bare minimum here, the U.S. is attempting to shore up some of its IoT security standards with the recent launch of its U.S. Cyber Trust Mark, which I know you're intimately familiar with. Before the call started, you let me know that you're thinking about it daily, maybe too much. And so I want to pull from your experience there. So again, for our audience, if you're unfamiliar, the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark is a cybersecurity labeling program specifically for IoT devices. So this program is created with the aim to help consumers make more informed decisions about the security of the IoT devices they purchase. So it's kind of like a USDA organic label, except for an IoT security laundry list of various areas of risk. So the labeling system is going to have a little shield logo on products that meet specific cybersecurity criteria. These are set by the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Tech. So let's get your thoughts on some of these. How effective do you think the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark will be in enhancing IoT security for consumers? What are your thoughts on its approach and effectiveness on paper?
I don't know that consumers care. The ones that do will already be doing their homework. I don't think a sticker is going to move that needle for them. The big thing about the sticker is, if I remember correctly, like you're basically saying you're committing to supporting a given thing for some period of time that you define. And you can say, never, we're never going to support it. We're releasing it and this is it. And there's no updates. And then you get a sticker. Or you can say, we're going to support it for 10 years and then not support it at all. And then that's where you introduce this liability question for you. So I just have a difficult time understanding why someone would sign themselves up for that. And that's not a technical conversation, right? Like you're going to sit in a room with a general counsel of a device manufacturer and say, listen, we're going to sign ourselves up for this potentiality for liability here. What do you think? I mean, listen, I don't have a law degree, but I think I can come up with what the answer might be. Just why? Why would you do it? There won't be a critical mass enough that will force everyone to do it either, right? Because let's say Cisco. If Cisco doesn't have a shield sticker, do you think people are going to stop buying Cisco? Of course not. They're still going to buy it. It's not going to matter. So you'll have this very small number of companies that might do it. But I don't know. What's frustrating to me about even my answer is I want it to happen, right? I just want it to make sense and I want it to be widely adopted and I want people to do the right thing. And I just don't know if this is the course for that.
A company probably wouldn't allow a label to go on their product that shows, yet we met 0 of the marks. We are the least secure product on the market. I mean, at that point, they probably just wouldn't even participate in the Cyber Trust Mark in the first place. And maybe this is the intended effect, just having to, get the sticker on there and show that you did your bare minimum will sort of raise the floor of security standards. So now more companies will at least be doing a bare minimum, even if it doesn't really resolve the issue. It's just kind of enough of an impetus to get them to do something or to improve their approach somewhat. Do you think on that front it'll be useful or it's strategically implemented correctly, or even on that front, is it not really going to achieve what, it's setting out to do? What are your thoughts?
If it was all carrot, maybe, but it's carrot and stick. So you're going to say you're going to do these things. Then if you don't, you've just introduced yet another opportunity for liability within your corporation. And that's just what companies don't want to incur, right? What I would almost advocate for, what I would almost say is saying that you're doing the things aligned with the cyber trust mark, but without getting it. Because now you're doing them, but you're not incurring the liability that comes with the sticker, right? So I don't have any desire to get more litigious stuff going on in this country. I just don't. I've offered a lot of comments that will be made public, depending on, I don't know how that all works with the agencies, but I've submitted all of these opinions to the agencies and commission that are putting this out. So it's really frustrating because I'm talking to the senior executive folks at these commissions and agencies, and it's like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth the entire time, kind of. It's like I support this wholly, conceptually, but then it's just like, how does this actually happen, right? So this thing could get passed. It could be a whole thing, and then you could have a grand total of 0 companies doing it, and it's like, so what did we accomplish? You know what I mean? We just wasted a bunch of tax dollars and energy and effort for what? So I think there's better ways. I think there's existing frameworks and policies and things like that we can use. And I also think that going after consumer products is really not the way I would start from a technology perspective. There's other markets that make sense to go after consumer first, right? Because that's where the biggest buy is. Newsflash: consumers are not the biggest buyers of technology, guys. They're not. Guess who is the biggest buyer of technology? The U.S. federal government.
I was about to say, is it us?
So it's like you have these agencies and organizations that literally are the biggest buyers, almost passing the buck's not the right word, but pushing it off. Like the consumer is the smallest buyer by a mile, right? So if you want to make a change and you want to see where we can make this impact felt by whoever it is, device, whatever it is, you have the buying authority. You are the biggest buyer on planet Earth. Don't ask the consumer to be the person that's like who's delivering. Just doesn't. I think it's not placed in the right direction. If you want to do it on the big enterprise, if you want to do it on corporations, that's fine too. Either way.
Because, and you mentioned this earlier too, it's actually a lot of the enterprise devices and the commercial and industrial devices in the first place that have the worst encryption and the highest amount of security risks. So it's interesting that all the focus then comes back to, make sure your Amazon Ring is safe. Now, I mean, obviously that's important too, but yeah, the conversation seems to be honed in on only one small slice of the market when, mass decision making and sort of mass standard setting feels like maybe that energy should be put elsewhere. So that is interesting to see that dynamic play out. Hopefully there's some course correction on that front in the near future.
Think about it, right? If you're Amazon and you're selling a Ring camera, do you care what the consumer thinks about how you're like you don't care. Like you're like, this is what I'm selling, and if you can buy it or not. You're selling into giant enterprises. That is not the dynamic, right? They're like, it needs to work, and it needs to work this way, or we're not giving you money for it. And so that's created this like long tail of issues and problems over a very, very long time, because corporations are just going to be like, hey, leave this thing alone. It works. And it's like, yeah, that's true. It does work, but here are the plethora of problems. And then you start hearing people say really stupid things like, but it'll never be connected to the internet. And it's just like, okay, how could you even make that statement? It's such an insane statement. It's like, maybe it's not supposed to be connected to the internet, and that's fine. But the fact that you design something because it's not supposed to be connected to the internet. Like what? Like, yeah, like we built cars and like they're not supposed to hit other cars. But guess what? They do. So we were like, maybe we should put like airbags in here and like seatbelts and stuff and have like some minimum level of engineering that exists. So if a car hits a wall, it doesn't just like explode, right? Maybe like you don't design things for how they're always supposed to be. That's not how anyone designs anything. So it's just kind of a really crazy set of expectations that's been like put out there by people that just doesn't align with really any other place in life.
I want to pivot a little bit here. I want to talk networks now as we start to wrap up the conversation. I'm curious the role that you see the networks themselves playing in this security conversation, especially when we see such a variety of approaches. I mean, there's obviously always fiber networks. They're touted for high speed, low latency, and also like generally being secure. But I'm curious how they measure up compared to like other basic networks, non-fiber based networks, or even more proprietary IoT networks like Amazon Sidewalk, right? Which is probably the most high profile iteration. We also see in industrial settings more sort of private IoT networks that are more just for OT needs, right? They're not giant, you're connecting all of your devices to also the company Wi-Fi. They're a little more isolated. Of these approaches, what are your thoughts on their general efficacy and their security measures and standards?
With fiber, you just have like a physics problem. I mean, tapping into fiber lines is hard, right? Tapping into copper lines is not. I mean, so that just makes that like one of those things is harder than the other thing. Tapping into wireless networks is easy. Tapping into physical networks is harder. So that's just reality, right? Whenever people want to talk about how this wireless technology is like more secure, like, it just can't be true. If I can go outside with an antenna and pick up what's going on that network, and then I go next door, and that network has a communication channel that is physical, the level of effort for me to gain access to the data on one network versus the other one is just very, very different. And that's not like really there's not really much of a debate to be had there. At least not right now. So, I think that's kind of like a pretty straightforward thing.
And with that argument in mind, would that same logic apply to the spread of wireless networks, right? So the more private, the more contained, the more sort of, an isolated network for just these ecosystems, the safer it is. I mean, is it always that one-to-one?
I mean, having dedicated networks that had some thought go into them before deploying them, I think is always a benefit, right? If you only expect these kinds of devices to operate on this kind of network and you design it as such, and you don't you do things like whitelisting of MAC addresses to allow, I mean, there's ways to beat all of these things. You're not broadcasting networks, you're using very, very strong encryption, you're segmenting things properly, etc. I mean, yeah, that's better than just having a network that's wide open and anybody can join and do whatever they want on. Now, there's just always this cost benefit. If you're going to do that, then that's going to be more to manage, more to maintain, more to administrate, right? You're now making networks more complicated and complex as a result. So, now there's no avoiding it, by the way. Like this is going to be the environment that we operate in moving forward, right? Are these massive wireless networks that are probably going to be mesh networks, especially with the advent of 5G and the massive node density that is going to be required to push out 5G in a real meaningful way, which to call disappointing, I think would be maybe the biggest technological understatement ever. But once again, this is what happens when you have unimaginably regulated industries like telecom, like the 5G, goals are just a total joke. Like to talk about something that has not come to fruition. Oh my God. We've had a 5G technology for a decade now, and it's like barely deployed. All right. You have cell phone carriers putting 5G like little emblems on everybody's phones when it's really just 4G, like being totally maxed out. So
to start to wrap up the conversation, let's get to a place of some actionable advice for our audience here. So we started by chatting on connected homes. Let's kind of circle back around there, right? I think you painted an accurate picture. When we're talking about connected homes, most consumers are looking for a plug and play option. Most consumers are not the most, security ecosystem savvy. Even the idea of choosing which cookies you want to allow on a site, and it shows you like 30 cookie options. Most people are just going to hit accept all, or just the necessary ones, whatever that means, which ones are necessary. So there's a lot of education on the market to do, right? And there's a lot of, there's a lot of education to do for the market. Now, with that in mind, what are some proactive steps that you think homeowners, or really anyone dealing with sort of consumer level IoT devices, what kind of steps can they be taking to help secure their data, their networks, and really these IoT devices against unwanted breaches and hacks? Any strategies or technologies that you recommend are added to that approach?
I mean, keep all your stuff updated as much as you possibly can. Whenever you're designing your wireless network, use the best encryption protocols that are available, which is like WPA2, I think is still like the latest and greatest or whatever, even though it's been proven to be not foolproof. Use a very long password. Length over complexity is always the benefit. Is going to give you the most bang for your buck, rather. If you have devices that have default credentials on them, change them. Admin is not good. So if you do those three things, you have just made like the barrier to entry much, much more difficult. Attackers are typically going after low-hanging fruit, especially as it relates to like botnets on consumer devices. Like you are not a target. Sorry. Because let me tell you, if you were, all three of those recommendations I gave you will be totally useless. And they're going to get you, period. That's it. All you're really doing here by taking these actions is making sure you're not a piece of low-hanging fruit. That's it. If a nation state wants you, I don't know what to tell you, man. You're cooked. That's it. But
I'll try to stay off, nationally registered radars then for that reason. Good call. Now, would that advice then apply? Like, would you give the same strategy and the same advice to businesses, commercial entities, industrial entities that are looking to secure and shore up their own devices as well?
No. I mean, yeah, like at a high level, like, yeah, keep things updated, use good passwords. Like, yeah, sure. But here's the other thing large enterprises have: third-party risk management programs, procurement, buying power. They have significantly more tools in their toolbox that they can use to drive this thing forward, right? And I think that is what's going to be required in some ways to push back on some of the device manufacturers, is when the buyers and end users of the devices are like, hey, we've identified a handful of problems here and we want them fixed. And if you don't fix them, then we're just not going to pay you any money. Or we're going to go find someone who will. So a consumer does not have that same capability. Sorry. They just don't. You can go write a blog post, I guess, or reach out to your congressman. Like, okay, let me know how that works out for you. Google has a lobbying firm has a GDP higher than probably most countries. I don't think that, you reaching out to your local congressman about the insecurity of your Nest camera is going to move the needle real far. And that's just the state of affairs that we're in. So because that's what happens, right? We say, hey, we're going to give the consumer the ability to sue. Okay. Congratulations. All these companies have now hired massive lobbying firms to fight that very notion. So now we've just like created this, dynamic where a bunch of people are just like trading dollars and nothing's actually happening.
I think that's a great place to end it, and really just that a lot of the change that we'd like to see around security measures is likely going to take a little muscling, various parties with, whether it's a lot of clout and influence over the process, or let's be honest, with fat pocketbooks, are probably going to be the ones that are going to make the biggest changes in the short term. And so any kind of unified action on that front, any kind of collaboration between entities that hold a lot of power in determining market forces are probably going to have a lot of influence in these next stages of connected device security standards. But I am curious to see how something like a cyber trust mark plays out. If it does end up changing the tune of how people engage with buying their products. It's one of those things, to be hopeful about, but I definitely take what you say, as I think a likely outcome, which is that, consumers, it takes a lot to sort of change buying habits once you get comfortable with just kind of picking up the thing that works and plugging it in and it gives you all the cool features. We're all victims of it in some form or fashion, so it's definitely an interesting dynamic to keep an eye on. But I think on that front, we'll go ahead and wrap things up for our conversation today. So thank you so much, Thomas Pace, CEO at NetRise, for your perspectives today, your insights and analysis. This has been really, really actionable. I've learned a lot, and I know our audience definitely has. We've touched on so many different slices of this pie. If folks want to get in touch with you to further pick your brain, or maybe they're interested in NetRise as part of their ecosystem, how can they get in touch? How can they learn more?
I mean, I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter and things like that. Go to our website. We have a contact us page where you can fill out. It automatically sends a notification to like an entire team internally. So as soon as people reach out, like we get back to you like super fast. It doesn't go into like some contact us black hole. So that's probably the easier way. Shoot me or anyone else on my team a message on LinkedIn. That'd be, we're very, very easy to get a hold of, and we get back to people very quickly, like typically within minutes, once something comes across the wire, unless it's like 2 a.m. on a Saturday or something like that.
Perfect. Easy enough. Thomas Pace, thank you so much for your perspectives today. It's been a treat.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us on another episode of Wavelengths, an Amphenol Broadband Solutions podcast. If you like what you heard and saw today and you want to make sure you don't miss out on future episodes, or you want to catch up on all of our previous thought leadership conversations, make sure you head to our website, amphenolbroadband.com. Again, that's amphenolbroadband.com. And make sure that you're subscribing on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I'm your host, Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B. We'll catch you on the next episode of Wavelengths.